Alright guys, so today we're going to learn about the midpoints on a coordinate plane. So we've got two learning targets. The first one is to use inductive reasoning to determine the midpoint formula. Inductive reasoning means just kind of think about it to come up with the formula. So we're going to problem solve there. And then we're going to use the midpoint formula that we find to find coordinates of the midpoint of a segment on the coordinate plane. So, in the previous activity, you defined midpoint as a point on a line segment that divides it into two congruent parts or two equal parts. Okay? Follow the steps below to explore the concept of a midpoint on the coordinate plane. So basically, this is just saying in our last two lessons, we talked about midpoint of a segment. We kind of talked about two-dimensional figures. Now we're going to put them on the coordinate plane. Whoops. All right. So, in the table below, you're going to write the coordinates of the endpoints of each segment shown on the coordinate plane. It says use a ruler, but we really don't need one. Just kind of guess where you think the endpoints are going to be. And then you're going to see if you can find the midpoint of the segment. Again, just kind of guess to see which point looks like it will be the middle. And then you're going to write the coordinates to help you out. So I'll do the first one with y'all. So A is right here. Remember, here is their origin, 0, 0. You're going to go to the right to get your x value, and you're going to go up to get the y value. So A is at a 2, 2. Okay? My endpoint of B would be to the right 2, and then up a positive 6. So B is at a 2, 6. Okay? Now if I'm just going to eyeball it, the middle, if it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, the middle of that would be right here. Okay? The midpoint, the coordinates of this will be a positive 2 and then a 4. Okay, so I did the first one for you guys. You're going to complete the rest of this table, and then you're going to work on 2a and 2b. 2b is on the second page, but 2 is going to want you to compare the x-coordinates of the endpoints and the x-coordinate of the midpoint. So here are your x-coordinates, x-coordinate, x-coordinate. So you're going to be comparing your x and y coordinates and see if you can come up with a pattern after you have this table completed. Okay? So again, complete the table and then work on questions 2a and 2b. Press pause and we will discuss our answers. Here are the endpoint values and midpoint coordinates that you should have gotten from completing the table. And then 2 wanted you to compare the x-coordinates. So for example, I have a 2, and a 2. Well, I noticed, one, they're all the same. So let's see if that happens each time. I have a 5, and then an 11, and then I get an 8. So it's not the same each time, but I do notice that this 8 is in between these two values. Next thing, I have a 4, a 6, and a 5. So 5 is in between these values. Then I have an 8, a 14, and an 11. So again, this value is in between my two x-coordinates. Now, hopefully you realize it's a specific in between. It's actually the middle or the average of those two x-coordinate points. So ultimately, I wanted you to come up with the x-coordinates of the midpoint is the average of the x-coordinates of the endpoints. And so if we forgot what average meant, think about finding your average GPA. To find the average of something, you add up your total and divide by the number you're adding. So for example, I have a 5 and an 11, so if I add 5 plus 11, and I'm going to divide that by the total, since I'm adding two numbers, I'm going to divide that answer by a 2. So 5 plus 11 is 16, divided by 2, which is an 8, so it worked out. Let's try it again. 4 plus 6. I'm going to average those two numbers, meaning I'm going to divide it by how many there are. 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So it worked out. We can try it again over here. 8 plus 14. If I add those together, I get 22. 22 cut in half is 11. Okay? So if you average the x values, they will give you the midpoint x value. And hopefully you realize it is the exact same thing for the y coordinates. So again, the y coordinate of the midpoint is going to be the average of your y coordinates of the endpoints this time. So exact same thing for a and b. You're just going to change x coordinate to y coordinate. So let's go up here and check this out real quick. So I have a 2 and a 6. If I add them together, 2 plus 6, and then average them, divide by my two numbers, I would get 8 divided by 2, which is a 4. It worked out. Let's jump down here. I have a 1 and a 5. If I add them together, 1 plus 5 is 6. Cut it in half, I do get 3. Okay, it'll also work down here. 4 plus 0 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is a 2. Okay, so when you average something together, you're adding up the total and dividing it by however many numbers you added together. And in this case, since I have an endpoint, I will always be dividing it by 2. Okay, so those are the patterns that we see when we're looking at midpoints. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to move on. All right, so use the patterns described in item 2 to write a formula for the coordinates of a midpoint M of a line segment with the endpoints x1, y1 and x2, y2. So again, over here we said we averaged our two numbers together, so I added my x coordinates and then I always divided them by 2 because I was dealing with two endpoints. So I'm going to do the same thing here. So with my x and my y, I'm going to add them together. So x1 plus x2, and then I always divided my answer by a 2, and that gave me the answer to my x coordinates. So then I can do the same thing for my y coordinate, and if you remember, a midpoint is a point which is an ordered pair, so we need a comma. I'm going to do the same thing, add my y's, so y1 plus y2. I always divided them by, oh no, I always divided them by 2. All right. There we go, y1 plus y2. Always divide them by 2. So now, since I found a midpoint, I'm going to go ahead and put these in parentheses and write the midpoint equals this formula. Okay? So we just used inductive reasoning and found the midpoint formula. So again, you're going to add your x coordinates, divide them by 2. Add your y coordinates, divide them by 2. Our answer will be in a point, so I put parentheses with commas. Okay? All right, so look back at the chart in item 1 to verify the formula that we wrote. So we're going to use the formula with the endpoints of 1, 4, and 11, 10. So my midpoint is going to equal, my x1 is my first x, so 1, plus, always a plus, my second x, which is 11, divided by 2. Now I'm going to add my y's, so 4 and a 10, 4 plus 10, divide that by 2. So now I'm just going to simplify. 11 plus 1 is 12. So if I wanted to go ahead and write 12 divided by 2, I could. 4 plus 10 is 14, divided by 2. I can simplify that once more, so that my midpoint is going to be 6, 7. Okay? So let's go back and make sure that was correct. So if I had a 6, and then I went up, just kidding. That was a new problem. Never mind. All right, so that would be the midpoint of M. What can you conclude about the segments AM and MC? So first, let me add a little picture. So it says M is the midpoint of A and C. So let's go back to our two-dimensional picture, and that's a terrible picture. So A, C, with my midpoint M. Let's see, A was at a 1, 4, so I'm going to rewrite that, 1, 4. C was at 11, 10, 11, 10. And then I found my final answer, my midpoint was at 6, 7. Okay, so here's a two-dimensional picture of finding the midpoint. So what can we conclude, what can we tell about segments AM and MC? So I know, back to my last unit, I know if it's a midpoint, I know that this piece is congruent to this piece, and I was allowed to make those tick marks. So it just wants me to write it out, that I know that AM has to be equal or congruent, because they're segments, to MC. Okay? So if something is a midpoint, it cuts into two equal pieces, and I'm able to conclude that those line segment pieces are going to be congruent. Okay? All right, and that is all midpoint is. It's pretty simple. It's not too hard. Just make sure you add your x values, cut them in half, add your y values, cut them in half, And again, midpoint cuts things into 2 equal pieces. Okay? All right. So then you're just going to try 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then we'll go over our answers. Okay? So press pause and try 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, so in number 5, it said explain how you could check your answer to item 4 to see if it's reasonable. So again, our answer was 6, 7. So one way is you could draw a picture of AC on the coordinate plane and plot the coordinate point of 6, 7 and see if it looks about the middle. So I kind of did that to show us. So remember, A was at 1, 4 and C was at 11, 10. So if I plotted 6, 7 in the middle, and it looks in the middle, 1, and then you could check slope. So it went up 3 over 5, up 3 over 5. That's kind of another way to show that it is in the middle. Okay? So I was just looking for graph it and see if it looks right. On number 6, suppose a segment on the coordinate plane is vertical. Can you use the midpoint formula to find the coordinates of the midpoint and explain? So remember, a vertical line is an up and down line. And so if we were to find the midpoint, we would notice that it should maybe be right here at a 3, 7. So notice our x values are not going to change. And so that is why the formula is, hey, keep your x values. And then to find the y point, you would again average them together, so add them and divide by a 2. So if you have an up and down line, a vertical line, that will be a good formula to memorize. Also, you could just subtract your y values and make sure to take the absolute value. So again, 10 minus 4 is 7. Just kidding, that's a 6. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So if I move 3, 1, 2, 3, you get 7. 1, 2, 3, you get 7. Okay? If you have a horizontal line, this is a good question. Okay, so in this case, your x values are not going to change. Your x values will change, sorry. Your y values will not change. So this is what it would be for a horizontal line. Okay, so in a vertical line, your x values are not going to change. In a horizontal line, your y values are not going to change. Hence, no need to add them and divide by 2. Number 7, midpoint M of the line segment ST has the coordinates 3, 6. So the midpoint is at a 3, 6. Point S is at a coordinate of 1, 2. How would you find the other endpoint? So there's 2 different ways. There's an algebra way and a number way. Algebra way is a little bit more work, but I'll walk you through it. So this is our endpoint and this is our midpoint. And if we remember our formula, it's the midpoint equals your x is divided by 2. So here's your x coordinate 3. That's going to go on the left side of the equal sign. So you'll have 3 equals 1, because that's the first x value, plus the other x2 I don't know, divided by 2. Okay, so how you would solve this is to multiply by the denominator, multiply by 2. That would cancel out, leaving you with 3 times 2, which is 6, equals 1 plus x sub 2. Then you would subtract 1 to get x sub 2 is a 5. So then that's the first order pair of our problem. You would have to repeat those steps to find the y midpoint. So I'm looking at my y coordinates. So 6 is my midpoint. So 6 will go on the left-hand side, equals your y coordinate 2 plus the y2 I don't know. Again, you will always times by 2 by the denominator to get 12 equals 2 plus y sub 2. Subtract 2 to get 10. And so that's how I got my final order pair of 5, a 10. Okay, so that is the foolproof way to find the answer. It will never, that will always work, And then there is kind of a visual way of looking at it. So if my midpoint is at a 3, 6, and I have an endpoint at a 1, 2, you have to ask yourself, well, how did I go from a 1 to a positive 3? Well, I went to the right on the number line, which is adding 2. So I added 2. I just have to redo that again. So 3 plus 2 is a 5. If you look at the y values, ask yourself how they went from a 2 to a positive 6. Again, they're moving in the positive direction. So 2 plus 4 is 6. Make sure you do it again. 6 plus 4 is 10. Okay? So this way might work if it's all positive numbers. It may get a little bit trickier with negative numbers. And then again, the algebra way will always work. Okay, so that's how you find another endpoint if you already know the midpoint. Last but not least, the origin, which we know is 0, 0, is the midpoint of a segment. What conclusions can you draw about the coordinates of the endpoints? So I drew 2 examples, one in purple and one in red. The answer is that your x and y coordinates are going to be the opposite signs. So for example, if I have a 4, 3 here, the opposite of that is a -4, -3. Okay, so if this has to be in the middle, your x and y values are going to be complete opposite. Let's take a look at a negative and a positive example. So if this is at a -6 and a +5, the opposite of that is a +6, -5. So again, if the origin is the middle, your 2 endpoints are going to have opposite signs. Okay? All right, and that is midpoint. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, you can get started on your practice and or your homework. Thanks for watching.